Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and you're listening into The Venomous Fringe. I'm your host, Chris, and join me tonight alongside my co-host, Ryan Tremblay, as we sit down with a researcher named Christian, who is the head of the Asheville Cryptid and Paranormal Society, and now the American Cryptid and Paranormal Society, my mistake. Join us as we sit down and speak with Christian. It's going to be a very interesting episode. Sit down and talk with him. He has a very interesting belief system. I like what he has to say. The key word here is interesting, as I've said it a few times now, because this is one of the very first few researchers I've actually had the privilege of sitting down with to actually talk to in amounts of many things, and his system is very interesting to me. But you guys will see what I'm talking about in just a bit. First things first, though, guys. Couple of announcements. One, I wanted to thank you all for your support for the show. Ryan and I, we've been really working hard, sitting down with people and getting to get a chance to hear what they have to say. And your support's always granted and magnitude because, of course, of the YouTube algorithm and how it's harder for a lot of lower tier channels to really get up there. So I'm glad you all are still enjoying the content and love what we got present so far. I had a few questions also about the Spreaker. How come we haven't really uploaded anything on Spreaker? Our last upload was actually about a month and a half ago, so I do apologize for all the people who love us on the other platforms. We will be throwing out 3 to 4 additional episodes on that podcast outlet by the end of this month, so you guys will be able to enjoy 4 extra crispy episodes. Of course, those are MP3 audio podcast platformed, monitude added versions of these interviews we're going to be releasing in the next few weeks. And also, too, guys, as everybody knows, Cryptid Ops. We had unveiled it early in the week of the official title of our special episode that's going to be hosted at the end of this month. We have Matt Squatch. We have Christian from the American Paranormal Society. We have Carrick from Crash Course Cryptozoology, who was on our show. Lobo and Tiberius, who are also on our show. Marvin Allen also is joining us. And a few other special guests. So, folks, that is going to be happening at the end of this month, July 27th. The official start time is going to be at 6 p.m. Eastern Standard Time to 11 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. If you guys are in different time zones, feel free to comment down below your time zone. I'll be glad to give you the officialent of when we start. And with all this information being said, folks, let's get into the interview with Christian. Joining us right now on the Venomous Fringe, we're sitting down with Christian from the Asheville Cryptid and Paranormal Society. Chris, welcome to the show. How you doing tonight, man?
I am awesome, and thank you guys so very much for having me. I am honored to be here.
Absolutely, dude. I'm very glad to have you here tonight. Personally, sitting down for you in the last hour, just getting to know you a bit, and also, too, conversating. It's pretty interesting to hear a lot from other researchers, especially coming out and reaching out, man. So, personally, to have you here tonight, it's a great honor. I really like what you do. I've been looking at a couple of your things, and I have to say, I like how you go about your research.
Thanks, man. And, we try to basically just incorporate the scientific method into all our research. And we always listen to every story. So when someone gets in touch with us through our website or our hotline, we always give everyone a fair shot. And if there's a credible amount of evidence verbally, we usually go and investigate. And we always, like I said, we use the scientific method to investigate. And I think that shows in our work because, not every bush has a Bigfoot or dogman hiding in it. Not every house is haunted. So you have to narrow it down. And I think by, using a scientific approach, that's the best way to do it. And again, that's the best way we do it. I'm not knocking anyone else's style, but for us, that's what works.
I have to agree with that. I personally feel that is the only real way to go. I know that Ryan and I, we constantly talk about this on the show, so I have to second it. But too, with cryptozoology, I mean, Chris, let's be fair here. We're in a different time period where cryptozoology now is so advanced because of social media. I mean, has that played such a huge factor in how we study?
You know what? You're 100% right, Chris. It's just it. What's fun? You can say hypothetically, you're just on a hike and you see something strange, and if you have cell signal, you can tweet that, and boom! By the time you're done with the hike, 500,000 people have seen this picture. So I think that has such a dynamic, effortless change to the cryptozoological world for those of us that have been boots on the ground for like 24 years in the woods, doing all this stuff, working hard, setting up the trail cams, looking into past investigations and going to those past places, and it kind of nullifies all that sometimes. But there's that dichotomy there that says, hey, this technology is useful. Let's use it, and let's find more evidence, and let's just show that to the entire world. You have that ability now. You don't have to. It's not like the old days where I'd have to sit there with my old Nikon 35 millimeter, take three shots of everything, hope I got something, and then send it off to get developed and see what I got. You have instant evidence right there and then, and I think that is a big game changer for a lot of people.
It really is, considering the fact that how nowadays it's so easy to go and put out images or put out research, and it's such an easier way of getting to know other people. I mean, we have YouTube, of course, and we also have Facebook and other social media platforms for cryptozoologists, and even that, networking is probably one of the most beneficial factors for those who are trying to promote something. And before we even talk about that type of material, I wanted to ask you this. Where did it all begin with cryptozoology for you? Where did it start?
Where it began. Such a good question, right? Three little words. Where it began.
Question.
I was when I grew up in northern Appalachia, and my grandfather took me and my cousin for a walk, and our house was like in the kind of in the sticks. Like the back of the house was just middle of nowhere. And we were just, and there was a good path in there that had been there for a long time. And we were just walking, and my grandfather looked down and he just grabbed us both and he started staring at the ground. He looked down, and there was this massive barefoot footprint. And I remember just being a kid and I was 5 or 6, and I just put my shoe next to it. And I remember thinking how much bigger it was. Because at that point in time, like my papa was like the cool guy, and it was twice the size of his foot. So he grabs us both and just kind of like he grabbed my cousin, he picked her up, and then he just grabbed me by the arm, and we like beelining it back to the house. And I remember him talking to my dad and my uncle. Everyone was there. It was a family barbecue. I can't remember what holiday it was. It might have been the 4th of July. I really can't remember. But I do remember that he was very adamant about wanting to know what my dad knew about what was out in the woods. I remember hearing that was the first time I ever heard the term boss of the woods. And like my dad was kind of being a smart apple. And I remember watching him slap the back of my dad's head. And I remember thinking it was funny because my dad used to do that to me all the time. And I'm watching his dad do that to him. It was just, I don't know, one of those multi-generational things. But I also remember they went into the other room to go talk. And I was being nosy. And my grandfather was asking my dad what kind of guns he had in the house. And he's asking, you letting the kids walk around out there? He goes, are you crazy? The boss of the woods is out there. And it was years and years later, much later, that I actually found out what that term meant. And that was a term for Bigfoot. And the real funny thing is about this is we were talking earlier, I've been writing a book for a while, and I was going through some of my past investigations. And again, this was like the sentinel event that got me into cryptozoology. And lo and behold, on the one of the more famous research websites, right about the time this happened, there was a report right in the area where I was of Bigfoot. So I think we actually we crossed paths, so to speak. And just a footnote on that. My grandfather, after World War II, spent a year in Alaska, and unfortunately, he died when I was very young, so I never got to get any of that information out of him. But I think that's definitely what sparked a fire to get me investigating in the cryptozoology.
As a kid, I mean, I couldn't bear to imagine you see this footprint, don't even know what it is. See, my childhood, I didn't get a chance to really go out into the woods, so I personally did not know how it would be. I grew up as a teenager figuring it out myself, but as a young kid to be attracted to or at least see something like that, that definitely does take you aback. And take it for granted where you come from. You have a whole bunch of wildlife that are in those woods.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. And, the other thing is, honestly, I remember, like, probably a couple months after that happened, I have to say it, and I'm sure everyone else will give credit to it too, but I remember watching In Search of Leonard Nimoy, and I remember the Bigfoot one, and then I remember thinking, I wonder if that's what that footprint left, or I wonder if that's what made that footprint, rather. So, it all just kind of culminated. So I have my grandfather and Leonard Nimoy to thank for this.
Leonard Nimoy, very fantastic talent, unfortunately passed away. I will say, too.
I was just watching The Simpsons the other night, and they had the episode with the X-Files where Leonard Nimoy was on there. And you forget how good he
That was a very
was.
classic one.
He was awesome.
See, I had Unsolved Mysteries with Robert Stack. That was
I
my.
loved him too, man. That was awesome. You know they're redoing that.
They're coming out
Netflix.
tomorrow, actually, on Netflix.
That'll be good.
At the time of this recording, by the way, this is June 30th, excuse me. So, by the time people see this, it should be already out. Just a thought.
Hopefully.
But no, man, I mean, and all, like, going back to it, I mean, as a kid, just to be attracted to that, and plus two, with small documentary type shows being put out there back then, it really does sync with your brain a bit on where you really think or you want to try to get a knowledge on these type of things. That's why, like, when I got into it at a young age, I took everything in with like a grain of salt, because at the time, you don't know what you're getting into, and plus two, it's interesting. So I don't know how I would be back then witnessing or hearing or seeing a footprint like that, and then also being overhearing a conversation about guns, and then the whole Boss in the Woods talk. You would think that that's a term that you don't hear today, right?
Well, like I said, it was years later before I knew what that was, Chris. And I was reading. It was must have been in probably the mid early '80s where I saw a thing on different names of Bigfoot, and Boss of the Woods was there, and then that kind of clicked. And I have to say this: no one in my family would say that was stupid or they didn't exist. Like I had a very very strange dynamic with that. I don't want to say my family was openly superstitious to an extent. Does that make sense? It wasn't like blatantly flagrant, but there was that underlying tone where there was some superstition on both sides of the family. And no one would blatantly say, "Hey, this doesn't exist," or "the paranormal is not real," because everyone had a story. You know what I mean? So it wasn't like I was being discouraged either, but it wasn't something I was openly talking about all the time. So I think that was also like that had an effect because it was okay for me to investigate this because I was reading and I was doing research. So it was kind of encouraged in one way, but in the other way, it was kind of looked at as, okay, that's funny. He's in a little phase. And unfortunately, that phase has lasted, 25 years.
And see, too, that's another thing, because when we look into a lot of the cases, especially now, as researchers and just studying this stuff, I think when we're diving into a lot of these things, we keep a very private life on it. I don't think many people can admit, unless that's what they're publicly known for, and they make these social medias, because not many people know that you're into cryptozoology, and to have that type of honor, to not just like have a family that is firm beliefs, but to know what makes them so much of a believer. I mean, where you come from too, in the Appalachia, there's millions, I think, of cases of cryptids, whether Bigfoot, Dogman, and mostly Sasquatch. Then you hear about mountain giants, right? And
oh yeah, definitely. And I've done research on mountain giants. Now I have never taken a report on a mountain giant. I've never seen a mountain giant. But there again, I mean, where there's smoke, there's fire. These have to come from somewhere. Where I live in Asheville, there's the Judah Cullen. He was seen out here, and he was a giant. He used to jump over mountains. So that had to have come from somewhere. That folklore has some basis in reality somewhere. So there has to be just a micron of truth in that. And where there's that truth, you can find more and more and more, and you just build on that. And that's kind of what we do at our organization.
And take it too, I mean, for your organization and what you do, to draw down the necessary science that does put all the dots together for data. That's another thing, and I wanted to ask you this too. With this organization, did this all come about at the early stages, or was this prior, before, of course, you had subsequent encounters?
No, I had been researching for years, like on the low. I had friends of mine that knew I was doing it, and I'd collect data, and I'd take all these. I had boxes with pictures and files and all this other stuff, but I always kept it to myself. It wasn't until I had I was very fortunate in the fact that one of my very very close friends is a man named Joshua P. Warren. And for those of you who don't know, Joshua, he's a paranormal guy. He's had 20 best-selling books on the New York Times. And he's just one of the greatest guys in the world. And he knew that I was a huge Coast to Coast AM fan, and I'm sure all your listeners know who that is, George Norrie. And he was doing something in Asheville with George Norrie and Tom Danheiser. So he invited me to lunch to meet these guys, and he knew that I love, he knew I was total coast to coast guy. And he was just doing, as I said, he's like a brother to me. So he knew this. He was just trying to be something. He was doing something nice for me. He was surprising me. That's just the kind of guy he is. And I had lunch with them, and I probably sat there, I think maybe for 2.5, 3 hours. And this was really funny because I felt so honored. There was like 12 people there to pay homage to George and Tom. And I'm sitting there with George, Tom, and Josh. Like we've got our own little table, and we're talking about, supernatural, his shows, things I've seen, the research I've done, and both of them, they asked me to go, do you have your own organization? And I was like, no, I really kind of want to finish up my PhD first before I do anything public, because I always thought having those credentials would give you more credibility, and I still do. And he looks at me and goes, that's stupid. He goes, the way you are and then the information you have, and you definitely know your topic. He goes, you need to start now because it takes a long time to build up that credibility. And pretty much that day after lunch, I started the Asheville Cryptid Paranormal Society. And since then, we've morphed into the American Cryptid Paranormal Society because using the name Asheville in my title, and that's where I live, and I don't regret it. But it kind of pigeonholed me because I'd be getting phone calls from people. I got phone calls from people in Canada, and they'd call me and say, "Listen, we're having this issue, but are you just strictly Asheville because it says Asheville, North Carolina?" And I'd be like, "No, we go wherever we're needed." So I've got people in New York, people in Florida, people all over the country wanting help, and that's what we do. We are here to help people. That's all. That is our main goal. We want to help people. If there's a paranormal issue or a cryptid issue and no one else believes them and they need help, we're there. We don't charge anything for it. We just want to help people, and we want to prove our case. We want to gather as much scientific data as we can and just give it. We just want to expose the truth. That's all we want to do. That's our mandate. We don't want anything else except the truth out there. And that's why we've decided to branch out a little bit more. And we just kind of changed our name to the American Cryptid Paranormal Society. And the website, you can reach it on, it's either Asheville, the website has all three domain names to it. So if you Google Asheville Cryptid Paranormal, or if you Google American Cryptid Paranormal Society, or my other moniker is the Cryptid Guy, all three of them lead to the same website. So everything is right there. All our evidence, what we think, our blog, everything is all right there. Because what we want to do is just make things easy. Does that make sense? Like all our evidence is in one place. All our contact info is in one place. So as opposed to having three separate websites, they're just all there in one. So that's why we did that. And our other thought process is we're thinking about growing and becoming bigger. So if, let's just say, we go to Tampa, Florida. Well, that'll be the Tampa the Tampa Cryptid Paranormal Society office. Does that make sense? So we're thinking about growth.
Well, personally, in my opinion at least, and this, I'm not saying this because you're the guest on our show, and it's going by our conversation before we started talking, and even just before our interview, you do have a very good presentation on deliverance. And I am not, like I said, I'm not saying this because you're a guest on our show and trying to make you look good, because personally I'm very blunt and honest. And
I appreciate that. Thank you. That means a lot coming from you. It really does, because I admire what you guys do. I really do.
Well, thank you. And I mean, Ryan, he's a terrific talent too, and that's why he's the co-host of the show, and that's why he's here. And to sit down and speak with you, I believe growth is very important, especially for the cause that you're trying to bring out there. I mean, and you started from scratch too. I mean, we were talking, and you brought up some pretty interesting points about how you began. Basically, we're in the same route. We're just still in the beginning stages. But for you to really do the boots on the ground, go out and do the research, and to draw some interesting science to it, that's a lot. And I believe you guys and your organization should grow. I believe it.
Well, I mean, and I appreciate that. I really do, Chris. And like I said, I'm flattered to be on this show, because it's funny, as we were talking about this earlier, and it's you and Ryan are these guys, like, you're just talking to them, but you feel like you've known them forever. It's one of those kind of dichotomies. So it's that's what's so cool about this. But the other, on the flip side of that is like, I've listened to your show for a long time, and I have never heard you say anything negative or bash anyone or pretty much be dishonest in any way. And to me, especially in the cryptid world, and I know you guys know what I'm talking about, that is just such a rare occurrence. And that's why, like, the people I will communicate with and do interviews with and things like that, if I can't trust them or if I don't think they have credibility, I won't go on their show. So I say that because it's just, to me, it's like the highest form of compliment I can give, and I mean that. So it's a very big compliment for me to talk to someone, and you and Ryan are just, like I said, I feel like I've known you guys forever, and I'm not trying to sound arrogant. That's not the case. It's just all we have in this game is our credibility, and if you lose that, then what you got? You know what I'm saying?
Especially now with how cryptozoology is. I mean, there's so much
Oh yeah.
promotion, there's so much ways of basically making the buck or two. But I think, too, what makes us all stand out, us three, is the fact that we do take things in a positive direction. I know that I have had my much so say negativity, or at least my honest opinion, on certain things, whether it's how a researcher that presents logic because of their notoriety, or because somebody has a strong belief system that's very connected to theirs, they'll follow it, because we don't really have a definitive answer. I mean, in my opinion at least, I don't think there's a definitive conclusion on anything cryptid because of the lack of materials that we lack and provide, such as proper evidence and some form of DNA. At least one of the very few things that we're missing.
Well, I mean, I agree with you, and the simple truth of the matter is, there is so much out there that we don't know, that when you have these people, and again, I'm just any person, I'm not singling anyone out, but when you have someone call themselves an expert, that is the biggest falsehood there is. There is no such thing as a cryptid expert. There is no such thing as a paranormal expert. There is no such thing as a supernatural expert. The reason why I say that is because we don't have the definitive scientific proof to give anyone the moniker of expert in these fields. And that's what bugs me the most, because I learn something every day, and I can learn something from anyone. And that's the problem, is you have these people that think they know everything. And they're stuck in their ways, as you said, and they don't want to think outside the box. And it's either their way or the highway. And that's where the technology we were talking about earlier kind of comes into play. Because if you can get, I've been looking into drones, and I know that I never thought I'd be saying that ever. Think about getting a drone to do research with. But to me, it's kind of like the next logical step, because you can get a drone with infrared. Just the problem with me is I'm afraid I'm going to be like the one that loses it. You know what I mean? And that's the only thing that makes me nervous. But that technology's there, and with that technology, you can show these people that are set in their ways that there's other ways of doing this, that their theories might not be 100%, and there's always room for doubt. You know what I mean? I'm 99% sure of what I'm doing is 100% right. Does that make sense? I mean, there's always that 0.01, that little standard deviation that could say, hey, you're completely wrong or you're completely right. And I think people need to realize that, especially researchers today, because there's so much tech and so much evidence that can be collected with that tech. They have to be open to use it.
I think one of the toughest challenges about a drone is the fact that when you're putting it in areas that do have heavily wooded environments, when you're trying to catch a glimpse of something, drones get destroyed easily. And
Yeah, and they're expensive.
these are not just like $400 off the market type things. Basically, the lowest quality brand. I mean, you want a good drone, you want to spend at least over close to $1,000 because of just how the quality is and what you want to get out of it. Especially if you want to record it, monitor it, and put it while you're gliding it in the woods. Because you see all those reports, you see all those cases where people put away those, like, their entire cams on their drones. Something happens to it. And then you also heard that case too of reportedly something smacking a drone one day. I thought it was, someone said it was Bigfoot. I could be wrong.
I did see I saw a TV show. I can't remember which one it was, but I think that's from a TV show. And they had, I think that was like in Alaska. and I think you saw like this black blur come and hit the drone. But again, I don't know how legitimate that was. But my thought process on the drone was I wanted to go above the treetops with an infrared and like a GPS. That was my thought because I wouldn't be competent enough to fly it in and out of the forest. No, there's no way I'd lose that in 2 seconds. I'm not very good with video games, so I can imagine I probably wouldn't be that good with the drone. But that was my thought process on that. Maybe just do a IR from high enough up, and then get a grid point, and then go look at, check it out. That was my thoughts on that.
Yeah, Ryan, what about you? I never heard your analysis on that either.
I have never really had a chance to look into that one too much just yet, but it's a curious one. I have heard about it before.
What, the slapping of the drone or using the
Yeah,
drone?
the slapping of the drone. The drone actually itself, I've never really had a chance to use a drone just yet, but that's something I would love to use eventually as a drone.
Well, don't you even have to get a license to do that too now? Am I
Yeah.
wrong on that, or?
No, I believe you do have to get a license, and you have to be careful where you fly them over as well.
See that, that's just another thing. I love the tech idea, but I'm just scared I'd fly it in the wrong place or,
Hmm.
get myself in
Well,
trouble.
I
I can do
don't
that without any help.
I don't know if there's any truth to it, but some people say you can't fly them over national parks.
Really?
Yeah,
I
I
did
guess.
not know that.
Yeah, they say it's
Major
for.
restriction, you get fined a lot.
Oh, there is a restriction.
I don't know if it's all state parks, but I do know that some you have to have some sort of like major explanation, some sort of main reasoning, because I guess there's something within the area or because of a certain place that doesn't need to be filmed. I'm not trying to go into like that conspirator type value, but I know that some parks there has some sort of restrictions, but I also too know that they try to play it off as if like you put your drone out there, it gets injured, if it gets snapped because of the area, it's not on them, and
Okay.
they don't want to get heat for that. It's basically like almost without a waiver fee, just giving you
Right.
the warning. But I don't know too much about it. All I do know is that there are some places that do that, unfortunately. But still, people sneak them in, and you can still get something because a lot of state forests, besides the regular wildlife, I mean, there's some things that people catch on drones. And not to get into the off topic, but when you talk about drones, there's so much things that people catch, and even whether it's a Bigfoot slapping a drone, or whether there's something smacking it that's not a Bigfoot or what looks to be a Bigfoot, or just in general, you see size of some of the wildlife. It really does take you back on what's out there.
Yeah, there
Well,
was
the
that
other thing is, yeah, I'm
video
sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off,
with
Ryan.
Bigfoot on there. I'm not sure if you saw the older video where they catch a Bigfoot just walking through the woods on the drone.
I remember that one. He's like walking through a cut in the woods.
Yeah, yeah,
I remember
that's
that one. The other thing is maybe they don't want people, seeing what's actually really going on in the forest either. Because
oh,
realistically, I mean, let's look at, most of my reports are right off or in national forests. I mean, that's, I have a whole theory about that too. We can get into that later too. But
oh,
I can see where they would not want anyone being able to do that. I mean, to me, it makes sense. I mean, I honestly, I'm very ignorant to the fact with drones. I didn't know that, but it makes sense. I mean, I knew you weren't allowed to fly them around airports and stuff, but I
yeah,
didn't think
around
national forests
my
were off.
town.
I knew you couldn't use metal detectors in the national forest either.
Yeah, in my town, you can't use a drone at all. So you got to go to the next town over if you're going to use a drone.
Really? No
Because
kidding.
it's such a small town. Yeah, it's such a small town. They just, no, they prohibited them completely.
Well, these drones today, like Chris was saying, I mean, you spend some money on these things. These things can do infrared. I mean, they record everything. They've got the extended battery life where they can be up in the air for a couple hours. So,
Mhm.
that does kind of make sense.
Yeah, in a way.
It's very intrusive.
It
I can
can
see
be.
that because you can be flying outside someone's window or something like, someone's always going to use it for the wrong thing.
Yeah, but you kind of notice a drone flying around, I would think. But
I don't know, man. I saw one the other day and you couldn't even hear it.
oh, so they're silent running now.
I mean, you could barely hear like I mean, it was just, you couldn't even hear the thing.
Ooh, boy, I got to get me one of those.
Yeah. It's like James Bond tech all over the place.
Right?
Just ignore the guy that's digging the hole for the corpse he just killed on the.
Just, yeah, that's
That's
that's probably what they don't want them in. They don't want. I mean, it does make sense though, because there's people camping, things like that. I mean, I get that. That makes sense. And I will tell you something. When we investigate, we go to great extents to make sure we don't step on any toes. I've actually called rangers and tell them that we're coming to investigate and that we have concealed weapons permits and we will be armed.
Oh, wow.
And what they usually say is, "What are you driving?" And I give them a description of my car and I give them the license plate number. And I can honestly say they, for 99% of them, they have been awesome to us. I actually had one real nice ranger leave a note on my car telling me to keep up the good work.
Oh, wow, that's cool.
That was awesome. And that was just cool. He never gave his name. It's just, I'm assuming that's who it was because we were out there so far. And I'm assuming, and I shouldn't do that, but I don't know for a fact because he didn't sign it. But I'm just guessing it was the person I spoke to, but because we were out there, and I told him what kind of car I had.
On the opposite end of that, any intrusions by the Rangers or anything like that?
No, but we did have we had an issue one time. We were in this place we investigate things and we don't use their real name. We give them a nickname. We give everything, and what we do is we've had problems in the past, so we give everything basically a code name, and we print up the report, and then we print it out and keep a hard copy, and then we'll keep something on the computer or a hard drive or something else. But we've actually had stuff disappear on the computers, and it's not just mine. It's been on. I do a lot of work with a guy named Tiny. His name's Daniel Tiny Hurst. He's the leader of Hurst Paranormal Encrypted. He's one of my closest friends. He's an awesome guy. And we both had the same thing happen at the same time. Both of our computers and mine was brand new, crashed. All the evidence disappeared. That happened several times. Our cell phones, we both had the same cell phone, maybe about a week apart. It was by coincidence. And we both started having problems with the cell phones. Our pictures were vanishing, just all kinds of stuff like that. And that was after this incident happened. So it's very predominant when you go into some areas that if they know you're going in there, whoever they are, if there's a chance you might find something, they're very interested in seeing what you got. And I think but the best thing to do is just be honest. This is it. This is what we got. There's nothing you can do about it. So just be honest with what you got.
Right. That's very interesting. That kind of touches on what we were talking about earlier. I mentioned how when people are going out on these investigations and they see a Sasquatch, their camera drains and they instantly think it's the creature doing it. So what's your perspective on that?
I believe it's probably some kind of advanced technology that the specific agencies have. I've had that happen to me. I've had my GoPro die on me, my cell phone die on me, my Nikon camera die on me, our thermo die on us, our E1 meter, and my Geiger counter all die all at the same time. Brand new batteries and everything. We use fresh batteries. I was doing my tax. I spent about $5,000 a year, maybe $6,000, just on investigating equipment and stuff. I mean, that's just a loss, and I'm lucky, man, because my beautiful wife lets me get away with it. But this isn't something I do to make money. I'm never going to make money doing this, and you guys know that. We do it for the thrill of the hunt, and just because we're curious, we want to know the truth. But that said, when you do this, you have to expect strange things to happen, and I'm actually very lucky too, because I'm also a paranormal investigator. So I'm always doing both. I'm always looking at the paranormal aspect and I'm always looking at the cryptozoological aspect of something. And when you do that and the other stuff starts to happen, it's not a surprise. But realistically, in my mind, when you get battery drain like that, that's not a paranormal or supernatural event. That is a technology event. That is someone with advanced, I don't know how advanced it is. That is someone with the ability and the technological ability to drain the batteries. I don't know how it's done, but I'm sure it can be done. And I think that's what happens. I think what happens is they're afraid you're getting too close to actually getting good proof, and they put the kibosh on it. And it's a great way to do it, I mean, it's brilliant.
Yeah, it's very efficient.
Yeah, and if anything, it's again, this is where I kind of sell out. If there's an agency that wants to hire me to go do this with them, my doors, they know where I live. I can be bought.
Shameless.
Tiny and I, we've already talked about this. Hey man, package deal, brother. Here we are.
Yeah, hey,
let's get rid of my student loans, and we'll start from there.
And also too, like, I've often been questioned about what happens with certain pieces of technology, because people can say that, you know, they could be with filming, shooting with their Nikons or using their HD camera, their handy cams out in the woods, and they try to get stuff, but then their battery drains. And, you know, people often think that there is that sort of supernatural display that plays into character with certain cryptids, but then when you go about it and you think of it, and when you get deep into things, and whether it's technology, because technology now, you have so many people that are using almost $2,000 worth of equipment, even more, and you have so many people that just coincidentally, they buy all these things, and because of how it is and how much it is, there's so much wiring and processing put into these things that it's very simple to have them be disarmed or something happen to them, which goes into display of how technology plays its role with battery draining and cameras and whatnot, as you said.
Anything with a Bluetooth or anything that's accessible, you're open to be interfered with. That's just the way it is. I think we can all agree on that. Everything, anything, like, you know, you can access the tech out there is just and just think of the stuff that the agencies have that we don't have. You know, there's that old saying that anything we have, the most modern piece of technology that we have on the open market, you know, the powers that be are 60 years past that.
Yeah, that's a
So
very scary thought.
that's a very scary thought, but it's probably very true. I mean, think about that. Think about this. Think about, again, being into, everything I'm into, the conspiracy theories, UFOs, aliens, things like that. I research all that stuff. And there's a lot of times where I think, a lot of these UFO sightings, they're not UFOs. They're probably special Air Force projects like the Aurora project. I'm sure that's happened. And that was what, in the early 2000s, where they tracked something taken off by Area 51 and 15 minutes later was flying over London, and it was all caught with a NOAA satellite.
Mm-hmm.
That's right.
So, I mean, and that's old. That's old. So you never know what the tech is out there. I mean, and the other thing is, honestly, Chris, you're actually undershooting it. I mean, I probably go out with $3,000-4,000 worth of equipment every time I go out, and it doesn't always work. It doesn't always work. And I'm a big safety guy. I believe in redundancy. Like I will not take someone out in the woods that I don't trust, especially the places we go. I mean, there's times, we're driving in 15, 20 miles in on a fire road and then walking another 6 miles. And nothing works. There's no cell signal. The stereo on your car doesn't get reception. It just, you're in the middle of nowhere. And in these places are where the dark things lurk. And that's where you're going to find the evidence, and that's where you have to go. Now, is it, and I can assure you there's been times there when I've done that I wasn't sure I was coming home, but I'm stupid and I keep doing it because I just want to know the truth. Now, you have to be careful, and a lot of problems will happen if you rely on technology. That's why, I always, again, I don't want to keep repeating myself, but it's safety first. You have to know how to be in the woods. You have to know how to read a compass. You have to have stuff on you at any given time. Anything we carry, you have to have something to make fire, some water, something to eat, some kind of shelter. It's all about redundancy. Like when we go, everyone's car has a tent, a sleeping bag, food, water, because you don't know what's going to happen. You never know what's going to happen. I mean, there's been times, we've gotten stuck in the middle of the woods. Okay, guess what? Well, we're not leaving. We're camping out. This is what happens. That's just the way it is. And you have to deal with it. So you have to be prepared. And unfortunately, people who just rely on all this technology, they get in a real life application system or situation where they need to do something like actually, live out of their comfort zone. And then that's when panic starts to set in. And that's usually when you have a problem. So, the technology is great, but you can't always rely on it. You know what I mean?
Absolutely. I mean, take it for granted too. Like when I do the show, like we could have tech issues, and just to give a quick example, we have those issues, and then we go ahead and we just basically we do what we could. I mean, we can't rely on $2,000 worth of what a computer can give out, or you build your own computer. You have several different monitors, and that's just how it is. I mean, we've had interference with our show before, tech issues. That's how it plays. That's just how it is.
And again, I do my own podcast. Tiny and I do our own podcast. Beyond Fringe. And we do it the same format. We set up the YouTube, and we've had, awesome interviews you just can't recreate. And they're just gone. They're shot, or something happened and they didn't record all the way, or there's like static, or you can't hear one it happens. And that's just, that when you rely on technology too much, that's what happens. That's why I've always been a firm believer. I could be very happy, like, hosting my own radio show. Like, kind of like if I could have any job, I'd be like George Norrie. But you have that communication with that one person, you know what I mean? And you get that you can either do it in person or on the phone. But I don't like relying on the technology. I would love to be able to do like the face-to-faces with someone. I think that would just be like totally cool, because that way there's two guys there or two people there and they're talking about, what they're passionate about. And I think that would be better for the audience too, because they'd actually get to see how these people, interact, and they get the real feelings of something. But I just, those days are probably long over.
I mean, I'm a firm believer in keeping that spike up, because I've often, when I've sat down with eyewitnesses, right, I can go visit one, and I could sit down, and I couldn't really do any of it this year because of the pandemic, but like before, like in the summer of last year, I'd sit down with a few people, and whether it was on the phone or even if it was locally by me, and I would just sit down and have a casual chat with them. I'd ask them, and it'd be almost dynamic to sit there and say, listen, would I record this, or would you rather me prefer to write it down? Have the computer made up and stuff, and just, go by the notes. So it's kind of just that basis for whether presenting it in the most professional manner or with a tech matter, as long as the message gets drawn out. I think that's always been a tough standard, especially because of how you go about it. That's probably the toughest thing about cryptozoology now, is because there's so many ways to go about a story that it either could be real or fake,
And you're right. And a lot of unfortunate, like you run into a lot of people that I don't think they're faking on purpose. I think they have a mistaken identity of something. So you'll get like a phone, like here's an example. Last year I got a phone call. This guy was telling me he had 3 or 4 Bigfoots around his house, and they're around every night. They're getting in his garbage and blah, blah, blah. Ends up being bears. That happens a lot. It's just misidentification. He was an older gentleman. He didn't mean any harm, but it was just bears, So you have to go up there. We did the research, and lo and behold, right around 11:30, here comes 3 bears. And it's like, there they are. Okay, well, they're bears. But I mean, that happens. And when you're presenting evidence, especially these days, I think that, again, the technology is like a double-edged sword, because there's a lot of things that can be faked. And I think if you had like that one-on-one interaction with someone, like if you have a witness in front of you, I think you can tell if they're lying, if they're honest, or if they're being just genuine. You know what I mean? And I think we lose that ability with the tech. And like I said, I'm a huge tech guy. I mean, I use it. We use the same formats to do what we do. But I would love to be able to just have that one-on-one interaction with people, and get that on film.
I agree. I want to also, speaking about the whole cryptozoology technology, I want to talk a bit about some of the cryptids as well. We talk about Dogman. Dogman, of course, being the infamous hot topic, I think. And what's relevant about this creature is that despite Bigfoot being around for a long time, this creature's hit the hot wave and everything because of just how unique the stories go about it. Giant werewolf-looking creature doesn't get any better than that. And
no, it doesn't. And, let's be honest, actually, the tales of Dogman or the Cynocephali, they predate Bigfoot. You've got them in Egyptian mythology. You've got Marco Polo talking about them. You've got them in the historic record. There was islands off the coast of India. People in Asia. I mean, they go back throughout antiquity. I mean, Alexander the Great allegedly hired a squad of Cynocephali mercenaries to fight with him. So, I mean, they're in the historic record. We really don't have any record of Bigfoot till Erickson shows up in 960 or 970 AD, and he's met by a large group of hairy men that smelled and were very violent towards him. So, I mean, there's not a whole lot you can mistake that for. So, I mean, they both go way back, but I think Dogman you're absolutely right. And then, in this country, the Michigan Dogman, that was what, 1860s, 1870s when we had that first sighting. So the Dogman is just, I think Bigfoot's always going to be the king, but I think Dogman is so popular now just because of the menacing stories that everyone gets from him. Dark Waters calls him the crypto terrorist. I've had a run in. I've had a run in twice with the Dogman. The first time I was in a car, and the second time I was doing an investigation with two other researchers, and that one was kind of terrifying because we ran into so much that night. That was like the craziest investigation I'd ever been on my entire life. I'm more than happy to tell you about that. But the first time I ever saw a Dogman, I was driving. My wife and I just moved to Asheville, and we were on the Blue Ridge Parkway. And I'm not gonna lie to you, fellas, I got completely lost. I had no idea where I was going. The Garmin GPS was just doing that little circle of death. The phones weren't working. There was just no signal. So I'm just driving along, and I'm going up this little embankment, and I look over to my left, and there is at first I thought it was a bear, but there's this massive creature just sitting on a rock and a tree stump, and it had its hands out in front of him. It was sitting like a dog, but it was just massive. It looked like a comic book character. It was just so muscular, and it had this black head, and it had dog's head, kind of looked like a German Shepherd. And I made eye contact with this thing, and it had like just these golden eyes, and it could have. A lot of people say they get scared, or it makes a face, or is purposely trying to scare you. That was the opposite of what happened here. It looked at me. I looked at it. It could have cared less that I saw it. I had absolutely no. It was no concern in this creature's face when it saw me, and I almost drove the car off the road. And all of a sudden, it takes its right hand and it shoos like a fly or a bumblebee away from its face. And then it starts to look at it, tilts its head like a puppy, and just looks at it. And I was in total shock. But this creature was just massive. The amount of musculature on this thing, it did. It almost looked like an over-exaggerated comic book character. That's how big it was. And, and I looked at this thing and I made eye contact, and it looked at me, and I'm thinking to myself, if this thing wanted to kill me or do me harm, it could have grabbed my car. It was big enough to just throw my little Honda off the road, rip the doors off, and it could have killed me and my wife. No, wouldn't even think twice. No one ever would have known. And now it was just opposite. It could have cared less I was there. If anything, it was more concerned about the bumblebee or the fly or whatever the heck it was than it was with me. Does that make sense? So so my first impression was this thing's massive, and I'm thinking I'm losing it, because up till then, I've been researching Bigfoot, and that I'd heard of Dogman, and I didn't believe it. I thought that was ridiculous. What the hell are you talking about, a werewolf in the world? What? I used to think people are crazy, and then I ended up seeing the damn thing. I have yet to see a Bigfoot. I've always wanted to, but I ended up seeing a Dogman, not only once but twice. And the second time, we were an investigation, and it is a place we gave a name to. We call it the Haunted Forest. And we had this place, Chris, this place was just whacked. We found 21 by 11.5-inch footprints. We got growled at. We found like hand marks in a hill that my entire hand fit in like the first two digits. All these pictures are on the website. So if you just Google American Cryptid and Paranormal Society, or the Asheville Cryptid Paranormal Society, or cryptidguy.com. It's all the same thing. And you can pull up all these pictures just under evidence. And again, everything we post is what we find. You look at it and you make your own decisions. But this is how we found it, and this is what it was to us. And we were following these footprints. And here's the backstory on this. This was a day, the place where we were at is a national park. We had absolutely no intention of really doing any real research. What we were doing is we were going there to get some pictures, just for some background pictures. And we had a new person with us that had never done anything before. And we usually, like I said, 9 times out of 10, we always go in armed. Everyone's got their concealed weapons permit. Everyone's very responsible. And they were doing a national park cleanup. So as the leader of my group, I said, you know what, everyone just leave the guns in the cars. And we don't want to freak anyone out. We're not going to fight. We're just here to take pictures. It's not a big deal. So we're marching in. We get in maybe 1.5 miles, maybe 2 miles. And then we start seeing evidence, like all over the place. It was ridiculous. Tree glyphs, friction burns on trees, X's, just all everywhere. Like everywhere we're looking, it's like it was unbelievable. And then I look down and I see these massive footprints. So we're measuring those out. We find like a choke point for like where deer were, and you can tell something had been killed there because there was blood all over the place. And then we found a pile of like turkey feathers and all this. I mean, it's just a plethora of stuff. And we're taking pictures. I'm climbing up the hill, and I noticed that there's these blinds that have been made, and they're at the top of this hill. Well, this is a pretty steep hill, and I'm going down, and I look down, and there's like this indented hole in the side of the hill. And then I realize it's this creature's left hand and is walking up the hill because the foot, I mean, there was like, these from heel to toe, I think it was a 72-inch or 74-inch spread. So this thing had like a 6-foot gate, and it was just massive. And Tiny and I were following this. The other person was just maybe 15 yards behind us taking pictures. And I'm climbing up the hill, and we come to these blinds, and you can tell they've been made. I mean, it's something or someone or something, where I say, had woven all these tree branches together to make this perfect blind. And you could see exactly what they were doing. They were using the hill as momentum to get to the deer, because you could see where deer had been bedding down. You could actually see where something had been killed over there. And I'm going up to this thing, and all of a sudden I hear this, and it was the loudest grunt I'd ever heard in my life. And I'm not going to lie to you guys. I mean, this is a little disgusting, but I had a chest cold about a week earlier, and this grunt actually loosened up the phlegm in my lungs. That's how loud this thing was. So I automatically put my hands up, and Tiny's not a small guy. Tiny's almost 7 foot. And Tiny's got this real strong Southern accent. And I put my hands up, and I got my right hand, and I'm kind of putting it down towards my hip, because that's usually where, that's where I keep my 357. And not that I was going to draw it. I just wanted to make sure if I needed it, it was there. And all I hear is Tiny say, "Christian, you ain't got your gun." And I'm like, oh, crap. So we both walk out of there real slow, and we just turned around and walked away. Well, about 15 minutes after that, I'm looking straight ahead, and I see maybe 40 yards in front of us to the left. I know exactly what that was because I'd seen it before. I saw the head of a dog man, and it went right behind a tree. And I'm thinking to myself, you have got to be kidding me. There's no way that's happening right now. I'm still like freaking out from what just happened. And now I'm dealing with this. So the person that was in front, I tell Tiny to get in front. I was leading. I tell Tiny to get in front, and I take the back. And when he was coming up to me, I said, "There's something following us." And he goes, "Where?" And I pointed it out to him. And sure enough, the second he looked over, this thing peeked around the corner real quick and then ducked back. And his face he's like, "You got to be kidding me." So we're trying to take pictures of this thing. We're doing all this, and we got some pictures, but they were like blobs. So I mean, they're just completely worthless. But this thing followed us at like maybe 40, 50 yards behind us for the next mile and a half out. And it was actually quite terrifying because we didn't know what to do. I mean, there was just nothing we could have done. We just could keep going. You know what I mean? So that was probably the strangest investigation I'd ever had. But we encountered two very different things, and they were very, very anxious to have us leave. So it was just one of those things. But that was probably the weirdest investigation I've ever had. And there was actually some other stuff too, but this was just beyond. And eventually, when you do this long enough, you just have days like that.
Well, for starters, I mean, these occurrences really are probably some of the more detailed cases I've gotten in reference to investigation and a quick run-in with a dogman. I want to just go back, though, in chronological order from your first encounter. Mm-hmm. I've often thought of it as when dogmen do that type of stance where they may not necessarily pay attention to a car or a human being and they're focused on something else. It's almost like dog-like behavior that you see out of a canine.
I've got a 14-week-old Boston Terrier puppy. I call her Blanche, the Cryptid and Paranormal Wonder Dog. And it makes me laugh because I see her do the same kind of head movements as this thing did. And, this is a 10-pound puppy versus, probably a 700-800-pound, 8-foot creature that could just pick up the Honda and throw it if it wanted to. But you're right. It's got that canid personality. And I don't understand the behavior that some of them display. as far as like when you hear like they were knocking on the or they were scraping the window, or they enjoy scaring people. And I've often thought, like I've even said this before, I think they enjoy doing it because it makes them laugh. I think they have a sense of humor because you never hear about anyone really being attacked. And in the stories you do hear, how much credibility is in there. You know what I'm saying? So I think, and the same thing goes for Bigfoot. I think we're their entertainment. I think they get bored and they like watching us. And if they know we're going to freak out if they come close or something like that, it probably makes them laugh like hell. So I think these creatures are intelligent enough to have a sense of humor. I'm a big fan of Tim Kumbo Baker, and he tells me point blank. I've talked to him. He says they laugh. Like he's heard them laugh. It sounds like he says it kind of sounds like Jabba the Hutt. Oh. So I mean, if that's true, then why wouldn't the intelligence of Dogman be on the same caliber? Even if you look in the historic record, the Cynocephali were regarded as having their own language. They made their armor, they made their own weapons, and their weapons were of such high quality that a lot of people wanted them. So it would go without, any kind of questioning that they'd have their own language and communication skills. And if that's the truth, then why wouldn't they have a personality where they had a sense of humor? So I honestly think a lot of it has to do with that.
And see, too, like, even when you go into the idea of them operating in that fashion with a sense of humor, I've often heard about the senses of them, and even to, there's something about them that they'll be attracted to. There's always a reason for why they're attracted to a human being, and it's always either something that they're about them, something about the vehicle they drive, something about what they look like, you can name it, but I always think, too, that these creatures do have some morality in them. I don't believe them all to be these evil monsters that often are promoted to be.
Well, I have a strange theory about this, and this is kind of far out there for me, but I don't know if it has any relevance. But there's a lot of people that say that they're descendants of the Nephilim, and that's a theory, and we've talked about that. And the truth is, well, we don't know. But if they are attracted to some people, my question is this: I would like, and this would be research. I don't know how you never get it, but if you could find out the blood types of the people that have had these encounters and continually have them or have seen them more than twice, I'd like to correlate their blood types and the sightings. Because I'm wondering if like maybe they smell something different on like a different blood type than another person. It's just like I said, it's just a crazy theory I had, a crazy thought I had that there might be something to. But I just wondered because if they are direct descendants of the Nephilim, then they'd probably be able to tell specific humanity from different like if there was any kind of deviation from like genetics as far as like being at one point from a divine source, then maybe they can sense that. And I don't know. Like I said, it's so far out there, even from my theory. But it's there's a possibility.
And see, talking about Nephilim and just how that basis has drawn too many people, I think a lot of conclusions do vary because there's been so much incorporation about how they play in such a factor, but it gets so lost between what people believe in and then also to go about it in such a direction that will throw somebody off, especially when you go into the whole demon aspect of one.
Mm-hmm. No, I agree. I agree 100% with you. Like I said, it's a crazy thought I had. It's a crazy theory I had a while ago because it was just coming up with I was just thinking about it because I actually came off of that because, like I said, we were talking earlier, and I'm a big fan of a specific author we were talking about earlier, and he's all about the bloodlines and things. And that's where I came up with that's when I had that thought. And it might not be original. He might have had. I don't know, but I'm wondering if that has any possibility. And but you're right because people start digging into this, and it just opens up so many different avenues of thought. I mean, you could go on and on and on because you start making connections that could possibly be realistic, but in other sense, they're just so far out there that there's just no way. But then we're talking about cryptozoology. So, again, there's no expert in the field. So who's to say this is right and this is wrong? And I think that's part of the biggest problem in this field is because those camps, they get divided and they're so stubborn, they won't admit that either one of them could have any flaws in their theories.
I also think, too, when you got people, and I'm not trying to go out and berate anybody, but,
I know,
like, when we talk about those who have good evidence but don't share it, or when people say they've communicated with these creatures, now that goes for Sasquatch as well, because I've often heard those people say the same thing. They've communicated with them, they've built some sort of connection with them. One of my guests on the show, and even my recent guest, Marvin Allen, we talked about a specific concept with someone who had a bond with them. So you hear a lot of those type of talks, but you really have to keep an open mind to believe it. But it really goes into depth when people who say they have evidence of it but don't choose to share it because of their so-called belief. It really does divide that skepticism and a line in the sand between what's real and what's not real in the cryptid community.
Well, I agree with you, but you know what? I'm a firm believer in if you got it, show it. And if you're sitting on evidence for some particular reason, if you believe this, you believe that, then why are you an investigator? And there's nothing, I remember hearing, well, I've got, there's nothing worse than talking to someone, well, I've got evidence that would change science and the way we think of the world, but I'm not showing it. 99% sure you don't have it. And, there's nothing worse than like there's an individual who I don't want to sound like I'm ragging on people, but they're a known hoaxer. But for some reason, they get all this attention from a certain media outlet. And, they're talking about, well, they have definitive proof and they don't want to, because they're blah, blah, blah. And they don't want to hurt the family, or, they're in with the family of Bigfoot or Sasquatch or whatever you want to call it. But, they say stuff like that. To me, that's a cheap excuse. You just don't have anything. Now you're just blatantly lying, and you've been lying so long now that there's nothing you can do except continue to lie. So I people like that, that's my belief. They don't have the evidence. If you don't have it, you don't have it. If you have it and you don't show it, don't talk about it, because all it's going to do is call you out. And if you're not going to show it, then everyone's going to assume, the worst. And unfortunately, in this particular field, that assumption is going to carry a lot of weight towards your credibility.
I couldn't agree more. But I want to just jump right back into the Dogman encounters you had. Mm-hmm. And one of the things that in your first encounter that you also mentioned was when it was not just an abundant curiosity of this fly or bumblebee that it was attracted to. You got a pretty good look at it. And
oh, yeah.
Even in the small encounter that was, of course, in a car, even though that you had seen this thing, was there a brief period of time where you kind of denied it, or probably thought, like, what did I just see?
Yeah, probably the first 20 minutes, because realistically, it was one of those situations. My wife was sleeping in the front seat. I was driving. I had no idea where I was going. I was just looking around because, honestly, the Blue Ridge Parkway is gorgeous. I mean, it's just beautiful. And, I was just enjoying being back in the sticks, being back in the woods. And then all of a sudden I look over, oh, look at that. Oh, look, a werewolf. Oh, isn't that nice? Huh? And seeing it, like I said, I almost drove off the road, but it did. For the first 15, 20 minutes, I was sitting there arguing with you. Did you see that? Was that real? I mean, I actually had there been a place to turn around, I would have turned around. But there wasn't. And it just, and it took a while for me to realize that, I had to overcome the scientist part of my brain, had to say, no, you did see that happened. So, I mean, that's a really good question. And no one's ever asked me that before, but I'm glad you did, because that's what happens is you're like, that can't be real. And then you're arguing with yourself. That's real. You saw that. If you're saying it's not real, then you're seeing things. And if you're seeing things, then you've gone insane. So that has to be real, unless you're crazy. Does that make sense? So you have that argument with yourself. And then, you decide not to talk about it, but then all of a sudden, you want to be honest with everyone and say, well, I know these creatures exist because I've seen one. Mm-hmm. And then, I've actually seen two. I haven't seen the full body of the second one. I saw the top and the head, but I knew exactly what it was from seeing the first one. That's just something you don't forget. And there's nothing, I just want to say for the record, there is nothing special about me. I'm just an ordinary average guy who just happens to look into the unknown for answers. That's all. I've got a regular job. I'm a married guy. I love my wife. I love my family. I love my dog. I love doing what I do. I love my job, and I love my friends. And that's I just research things that most people think are ridiculous. And but when you have that is, some people say it's a life-changing event, or you're never going to look at anything the same again. I would go with the latter. I don't think you ever look at anything the same when you see something like that. because then you realize that everything you've been told throughout your life is either been completely sanitized, or you've been lied to, or the people telling you what you're supposed to learn don't know what's really out there. So it's mind altering, to say the least, in that aspect. I mean, I didn't have any PTSD from it. I didn't have nightmares from it. Again, the thing could have cared. Like, if anything, you know, Chris, the truth of the matter, if anything, it's insulting that a bumblebee was more interesting than me.
Oh, I can imagine. I mean, it's one of those cases too where often I hear about like people who they looks at them, or it's chasing their vehicle, but also too they just hear the fact that it was more curious of an actual bug. Kind of makes it wonder. It's like all these creatures just seem to have their own separate personalities, and if anything, that one was probably more attracted to the littlest and most asinine of things than an ongoing car. I don't even think if it wasn't even paying attention to the fact that it probably wouldn't have ever thought, if you had hit the thing, it probably would have never thought about it because
I remember driving by. I made eye contact with me, and it lasted maybe 3 seconds, and then it's just like a puppy does, man. It stared off in the, like, what's that? And then it's flicking its hand. I mean, but the thing that, honestly, it's not the scare. The thing that is so impressive about this thing was it was just so damn big. I mean, it was huge. It looked like, honestly, it looked like it was built like the Incredible Hulk with a dog's head and black. It was so black. It was it was so shiny black. It looked like it was just, I don't know. I don't know if you have, and for the dog lovers out there, it was like if you have a black dog and it's right after you give it a bath, and it's, it's just kind of fluffy and it's clean, and that's what it looked like. And it was just completely black, though. It was just incredibly black, and it was gorgeous. I mean, as far as being like an animal, it was incredible. I mean, it was just like, man, that is a incredible specimen. I mean, look at that thing. That thing's just, I mean, it's incredible. It's one of the, and again, I'm a religious person, but it's like, this is something else God must have took some time and putting into, because this thing's just incredible. And that's how I feel. I mean, it was just incredible to look at. And I'm not one of these people that says I feel honored to look at it and I know I bonded with it. That has nothing to do with it. I looked at the right place at the right time, and this thing just didn't care. And it knew I was leaving, and it didn't care, and it was more concerned with something, and that's how it went down. I mean, again, like I said, there's absolutely nothing special about me. I don't have any kind of mind powers, or I didn't have any mind speak with it, and it was just an incident that happened while I was driving. But it did completely change my thought process as a cryptozoologist, because now all these things that I've heard, like the Beast of Seven Shoots and all these Dogman reports and all these werewolf reports, now I'm starting to think they're not fake. Now I'm starting to think that it's not a misidentification of the Bigfoot. Now I'm starting to think there's a whole different species out there. And that's what that did for me.
And take into consideration that some people who do have encounters, the psychological effect to them, it stays permanent. There's often been people who, they go ahead and they have these reports, and then when the reports really, they skyrocket, and then their recurring occurrences, it does play psychologically. And I even think people who watch shows, like, you can watch the show and you can watch it for the encounters, but you'll kind of be freaked out by it because that's just kind of the nature. I mean, I remember when I first really started getting into this and I started watching all the shows, and you hear all these encounters, 90% of them were talking about how it was chasing them, or how they knew someone who was getting chased by one. We had authors and researchers who were going on shows describing these reports and how graphic they were. And it really draws that psychological effect, because often too, and another thing, a big shout out to Dark for, was the fact that when I had sat down with him, people do take this a lot. They do really grow attached to this. It's almost like it's a relationship with the Dogman phenomenon.
Yeah, and they do. People bond with strange things. Again, I didn't have any moments of like total bliss or anything when I saw this thing. It was total shock, and it did change my thought process on cryptids and what exists. Because again, up till then, I thought every Dogman was either misidentification of a bear or Bigfoot. And now I realize, boom, okay, now this is in play, so Dogman's real. Actually, Dogman and Bigfoot are both in my logo. I mean, that's where that came from. because I mean it's just if anything, I personally respected the fact that there was another cryptid out there. And then when you start doing the research, you realize that that cryptid is not something new. That has been there for a very, very long time. And you know, the Native Americans. Chris, I'm going to tell you something. I am a huge, huge believer in the Native American way of life. I think if we paid more attention to the way the Native Americans lived their life and the way they lived their life with the land and the everything, that we'd be better off. You know, we're talking about a culture that's been around in this country for 14,000 years, and they have seen. We've been here less than 300. So we're talking about a culture that has been here, seen there, and done everything there is to do here, technology aside. And they have, you know, stories of these creatures, and they can tell you how to deal with them and what their ancestors did to deal with them. So I always go back when I do any cryptid research. I always go back to Native American folklore and mythology, and I use that as my reference point. All right, because if I can find something there, then they're aware of it. This is how they dealt with it. Then that's what that's the belief system I go with. And there are plenty of dogman reports throughout the Native American folklore, and you just have to know what to call them because they use different names. It's like everyone has a different name for Bigfoot. You know, we call them boogers down here in the South. Up north, it's Bigfoot, Hairy Man. You know, Boss of the Woods. You know, Sukaloo. Anyway, I mean, there's just so many different names for the same thing. It's just you have to know what the local name is. You know what I mean?
Yeah, and I think even with Bigfoot, like, that's been pretty well known. And plus, too, you have all those millions of names that are brought up, and in general, you know, when it's all throughout, like, their own system, like, you know, the Florida skunk ape, for example, or the Yeti. But I want to ask you this, too, and it might sound like a silly question, but with the name Dogman, do you think that's a very relevant name as scientific? Do you think would be classified to put under as this cryptid? Or do you think something like man-wolf or something close to what eyewitness reports seem to come about?
Well, first of all, there's no such thing as a dumb question. Second of all, I think it's already been recorded as a cynocephali. So I think if they were going to scientifically classify it, I'd call it a cynocephali. But Dogman, you know, I'm kind of torn because I kind of like that, but I kind of like the term werewolf too. But the supernatural and condemnation with that would never disparage anyone from calling it anything but a dogman. You know what I mean? Because there's no transmogrification. It doesn't go through any changes. It's born a dogman. It lives as a dogman. It's going to die. You know what I'm saying? It doesn't change. It doesn't go from human to dogman. That would be a supernatural event. So I don't know. That's a good question, man. Because what would you call it? I mean, like I said, I would stick with cynocephali and then do subgroups of the cynocephali. And what we do in American Cryptid Paranormal is this. We have subcategories of dogmen. We just call them alpha, beta, and Charlie. And the alphas tend to be the big, huge, massive ones. The betas are a little smaller than that, but they have that same build. And then the Charlies look more like a wolf running around on two legs. So I don't know how you would classify those. I mean, like I said, you go cynocephali alpha, cynocephali beta, and cynocephali Charlie. I mean, that would be the way I would do it. But you know, I'm just a guy that has his own website and can call things what he wants to. So you know, and there's probably no science to mitigate what I call them, but I just go off of historic events, and cynocephaly to me would work. But I mean, Dogman's a cool. I kind of like the name Dogman, but I mean, I can see where a lot of people think it's just a misrepresentation. You know, I'm sure there's a couple of scientific names people can get for it. You know, Canis erectus human or something like that. I don't know. You know, I'm sure there'd be a Latin term for them.
Very much so, even with the scientific classification. But that's like it's a basic simple word. It's like we call it great white shark, but when you unfollow its actual name, it's like, wow, because no one's not going to remember that, and plus really pay no attention to pronouncing it because of the science behind it.
When you hear the name Carcharias, you're not thinking great white shark.
Negative,
yeah.
But
that's not what's in your head. When you see a great white shark, you're like, it's a shark. And it's big and it's white and it's going to eat me. So yeah, no, I'm with you, because you're right. It's the people are going to call it whatever they're going to call it. You know, and it's like every species has a Latin term for it. It's just, you know, you're going to call it what you call it. So, you know, I think it's probably just going to be regional. And if it's ever proven that they exist, or if it's ever admitted, if anyone ever admits they exist, I'm sure they'll have a specific name for it. You know, there was not too long ago, about 5 years ago. I can't remember the name of the report. I actually have a copy of it, but this doctor allegedly wrote a report about doing autopsy. I'm sure this is going to sound familiar to you, but he did reports or autopsies on Bigfoot, and he said there was 5 different kinds of them, and like, you know, they gave this whole background, and he went to Harvard, and he was an MD and all this other stuff, and he did this in the 60s and the 70s, and they had a whole scientific name for the subspecies and the species of Bigfoot. Um, So I'm sure if that were to actually come out, that's exactly what they'd call them, and then they'd still go by Bigfoot.
That's a good way of putting it, and I have to agree. Ryan, what do you think from the encounters and to what we've basically covered here? What are you thinking, man?
I'm thinking it's very fascinating stuff, man. And talking about the names, we would have to be really careful what we would call these things. Because calling them dog, man, you're kind of implying that they have the human DNA in them, and I don't believe they do. So calling them dog man, we're going to tell people that's what they are. They're going to assume they're part human, so we'd have to be really careful what we pick out.
Well, I mean, we could call it the North American upright walking canid.
Or Wolven or something like that. That's the kind of.
I like Wolfman. To be honest with you, the Wolfman sounds cool, but there again, there's man.
Yeah. You could always go with Wolven though. That'd be a cool name for them. But yeah, anything with man on it, it's going to imply that they have our DNA, and I think that's something that really needs to be avoided.
No, because you know what, Ryan, you're 100% right. Because then there's going to be that subcategory of people are saying, well, and then this is where all the problems will start.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it goes right back.
How dare you say it's got our DNA? How dare you say that's not an animal?
Right.
How dare you say it's an intelligent creature without, that would cause a whole mess of problems. You're absolutely right.
Right,
and it was correct on that.
Goes back to the supernatural thing too. If we call them werewolves, people are going to think about movies and how
exactly. They're incoherently evil. They're automatic. They need to be destroyed on sight.
Exactly. Or they're a man by day.
Yeah, you want to avoid that stigma altogether. It's a tough call. I tell you what, Chris, you're onto something here. What you ought to do is you ought to have your audience write in what they should call what we call the dogman. We should give them a new name, and then I think you've got enough juice where you could actually get that rolling.
Hey, that's an idea.
I think so. I think I mentioned it once a long time ago to a lot of people, but I also think that we mostly had, I think it was Wolfman and Manwolf that really popped in. Some people said werewolf, but with a lot of the listeners of the show, with how we go about it, they really do kind of get a glimpse of what we're trying to bring out and present. So without going into too much of that, I'm just thinking that it'd be great to also redo it because it is a curiosity factor. I was thinking about it a while back, and I was like, where we talk dogman, but it's almost like, I wouldn't say it's goofy, it's just the concept that I've seen videos of guys who would hide in the sweater and the dog's head pops up, and I just think of those videos, and it's just, I mean, as so off subject as it is, the term dogman, because of the canine-like attributes that we see in normal canines that are very similar to these creatures, I can see where it comes from, but not many people can fall into it because after a while it's like, ooh, we saw the dog man. And if for a non-believer or skeptic out in the field, they'd be like, oh, what the hell's that? Or someone be like, oh, so you saw something and were you guys on something? That's normally a lot of the skepticism and criticisms that people get in these reports. So I think it's just how you go about it. I think for the longest time, too, the same thing really applied to Bigfoot, but Bigfoot's so well known. Bigfoot made mainstream media, for God's sake. So Dogman hasn't really reached that peak besides, the small dirt sheets. So.
I think Dogman's next big deal. But I tell you what, Chris, if you allow me, I would like to challenge your audience to come up with a better name. So when they hear this, they can they can put in their idea in the comments. And you and Ryan can pick one out. And then what we'll do is we'll start using it on a daily basis on all our podcasts, all our interviews. We'll call it something else. I think that'd be cool. And I think if anyone can get it done, I think you and your viewers can definitely do that.
That's a great idea.
Turning the tables. I like that idea. And that's a challenge right there, folks. You're going to hear this. And I request that, and I think we all do. What would you guys call Dogman? That's going to be the main question, and we'll keep that going for quite a while. We want to see all the responses, so it'll be unique.
Well, may I put in a caveat to that, my friend?
By all means.
You cannot use the word man in the word man has to be gone. It can't be used.
It's a very interesting challenge, too. And see how many people will have to curve it around. It's like one of those tongue twisters. It's like, how can I change this without necessarily putting that there? That's a good way of presenting it.
Yeah, that means no derivatives of the word man either. You can't use a Latin word for it or anything else like that.
You have to come up with its own species. No, I'm sure there's a scientist in your viewing audience that can, oh, yeah, we'll call it the canis, blah, blah, blah. So you never know.
That's very challenging, actually. Now you got me thinking about that.
Yeah, now I'm thinking about that. What would you call that?
Yeah, what would you call it?
I guess it'd be Canis erectus, wouldn't it? Because it's bipedal.
I've always went around that. I know that some of the other researchers in the field have brought that up, and I think that's a good one.
But the thing is, though, are they always bipedal? I don't think so.
See, that's the thing, because I, from what I've seen, and just from the two, I didn't see the first one move, but the way it was sitting like, you know what I mean? It was sitting like, you know how a dog will sit and it's got its hocks out and its front hands are in the middle, or its forelegs in the middle. That's how this thing was sitting, and there isn't a doubt in my mind this thing had hocks.
Okay.
But I don't know. I mean, because you hear these reports about hearing the snaps, and then they go to 2 to 4, they go quadruped to bipedal like in 2 seconds. I just don't know.
Yeah.
And, I've never seen. I've also heard that Bigfoot can go quadruped from biped to quadruped.
Yeah,
and
knuckle walking. Yeah, they knuckle walk.
Yeah, they can actually run about 40 miles an hour with that. Maybe they somewhere along the line they share some of the same family. I don't know. It is, again, that's one of those things where it's just until you have the genome done, you're never going to know.
I think with Dogman, though, the popping we hear, it might be an extra hip bone that, it shifts when they go from quadruped to biped.
Ryan, that's brilliant. I never even thought about that. I always thought it was kind of like their joints just popping in and out. But you know what? That makes sense because they'd have to evolutionary develop that to move like that.
Yeah, it'd be an adaptation on their part.
Yeah. I mean, who knows? I'm sure some agency somewhere is probably going to listen to this going, they're not too far off.
We must eliminate them now.
Yeah, now they have to come off the air, or they have to be taken off YouTube now. So there it is. They've come too close. It's a good show, but that's what we tried.
Good job, guys.
Means we're doing something right.
Yeah. Hey, we took a shot. Sometimes it sticks.
We did something right the wrong way. Nice.
Story of my life, man. That's how I wake up every day.
Yep, same here.
I find, even too, just the idea of Dogman being big in the whole cover-up aspect, because how many times have Bigfoot been put out there on the pasture and people take a look into it, take a glimpse, and they come back and they're like, ooh, not too bad. But then with Dogman, it's like you can't find anything. Now, Chris, let me ask you something here, because we talked about this briefly even before the show. Why do you think it would be so easy for people to kind of keep the idea of the quote-unquote Dogman hidden? Is it because of something about them that could just be so attributed towards just intriguing? Or is there just something that just needs to stay hidden?
Well, here's the thing. Let's just say that the government wakes up tomorrow, and I'm not just saying the government, I'm talking about, because I don't believe this is just isolated to the United States. Let's just say the powers that be wake up tomorrow and say, okay, let's be honest with everyone and tell them Sasquatch are real, the Yeti's real, the Urine's real, the Orang Pendek's real, the Yowie's real, whatever you want to call them, it's all real. The Cynocephaly is real, the Loch Ness Monster is real, and Mothman hangs out in Vegas on the weekends. All that's real. There has to be an accountability. And here's what I mean by that. If you have the fortitude to come out and say these are real, then you're going to have to talk about what they do. Now, I am sure somewhere along the line, one of these, let's just say dog persons, until we find the name we're going to roll with, has probably attacked and or mutilated, eaten either cattle, damaged personal property, and or maybe have done harm to a human being. Then you have to answer for that, and that makes you liable as people running the show because you did not warn them. These things are in the woods. They're in this area, they're in that area. They're pretty much in the national park systems area. So what you would do there is open yourself up to an unbelievable amount of lawsuits. So before you could do that, you would have to pass legislation preventing that. And if you're going to do that, then people are going to start asking questions. So you'd have to be able to pass the legislation and then answer the questions, which would be very difficult. Not to mention the fact, then you would have to admit that there's, 10 to 12 foot North American primates throughout the continental United States, North America, South America, Antarctica, wherever, Asia, Europe, wherever, everywhere. And every government in the world would have to kind of come clean. And the chances of that happening are pretty nil. And I think that would be one thing. But then you come out and say, oh, by the way, there's 8 to 10 foot werewolves out there. And that have been out there for a long time. And, every once in a while, someone might disappear around them, not saying anything, but, not saying anything. So I think that's just a hard road to hoe. Does that make sense?
Total sense.
Agreed. It does draw a heavy line, and that's also one of the reasons why I think we don't really see that high top evidence that we want to see of one due to those natures.
Well, the other thing is, I'm sorry, but I was going to say real quick, the other thing is, I got interviewed one time, and they asked me what I thought if Bigfoot was Bigfoot came out and it was proven real. And then they brought up the fact that, what if some of the DNA is human? And I said, well, if they do that, what if we find out Bigfoot has a soul? I mean, what if we find out Bigfoot's religious? I've actually heard reports, and like I said, I never personally took it, but I heard a report one time where this guy had actually hit a Bigfoot and came out to help it, and its mate was right there, and it had dislocated this creature's hip or something. I can't remember the whole thing, but as he's helping this creature, his crucifix fell out of his shirt and was dangling, and the Bigfoot that was injured pointed to his cross, touched his cross, and then pointed to the sky and made like their own word for, I guess, a deity. And that's kind of what he perceived out of this. So what's to say that Bigfoot, not only shares our DNA, but maybe they share our own belief system. And if that's the case, then how are you going to go around not protecting them because they're a subhuman species, or maybe they're a different species of human? So we just don't know. And maybe that's why they're so protected. Maybe that's why, in the Native American folklore, they were called cannibals. It wasn't because they were eating each other. It was because they were eating other humans.
Yeah, it's always been kind of one of the most heavier hits of it because of their culture and how they were even back before modern the cryptozoology really played a factor. Ryan, any additional thoughts, man?
Yeah, I was just thinking about that. Imagine if they did have a religion. That would just be a mind screw for everybody.
What if it was religion? Think about that. What if it was the same basic belief?
Would that change our religion in any way, though? Or, what would that change for our lifestyle?
It wouldn't change mine any bit. I'd be sitting there thinking, yes, yeah, I told you. But if you had some very devout religious people, I'm sure that would completely change their point of view on some stuff.
Well, yeah. I mean, they'd be saying the Nephilim are worshiping the same God, so it'd be kind of weird for them.
It'd be very weird.
Yeah. Huh. Now, on the subject of missing people, though, what do you feel about the missing 411 cases? Do you think all those can be attributed to cryptids or no?
No, I mean, I'm a big David Pilates fan. I've got 2 of his books right now, actually, and I've got the book on giants that he wrote, and I haven't even opened it yet because I haven't had time. But Pilates is a genius simply in the fact that he writes these books and he sells millions of them. But all he does is he goes through reports of missing people and publishes them. And, it's brilliant.
It is. It's a brilliant tactic.
It's a brilliant tactic, but you can't refute it either because this is a real report of someone missing. I think a percentage of them definitely are cryptid in nature, but I think a lot of them are probably, I think I was doing some research on this, and like 600,000 people a year disappear, but most of them return,
right.
and that's That's yearly. I've also seen reports that there's up to 1 million people a year disappear. But you know, I'm not sure. I never looked at the federal FBI database on that. The you know, the clearinghouse. I didn't get that deep into it. But you know, they say it's 12 to 1,500 people disappear in the national park systems a year, and that's a lot of people.
Oh yeah, for sure.
Now, I mean, they're looking for 3 people right now, isn't it, Mount Rainier?
Yeah, yeah, that is.
I
I
mean,
just read about that one not too long ago.
And not only that, the weird thing with that one is same day, different places. All of them go missing.
Yeah, it's kind of frightening, isn't it?
I don't believe in coincidence. That's something else.
Neither do I. So there's something going on with that one.
So there's something going on, and then you know there's a lot of reports, and that's what the brilliance of Pilates is he goes or Pilates. I can't pronounce his name. I don't know if I'm pronouncing it right. I'm sorry if you hear this, Mr. Pilates. I don't mean to mispronounce your name, but
no, don't worry about it.
But you know, he goes through everything like with a fine tooth comb, and and the ones he prints. You know, he never comes out and says what he thinks, but I think it's kind of easy to read between the lines because the reports he makes, there's too many questions. You know, there's no cut A and B. This is what happened. You know, sometimes you find stuff like a couple of years later and ends up being the remains of someone, and it's like, well, how, you know, these people check this area 3 or 4 times,
right?
You know, so it's just one of those things. It is a complete cluster. And then if you ever look at any of the Phil Schneider videos, I don't know if you guys have ever watched him. He was the guy that talked about DUMBs, deep underground military bases.
Oh yeah,
he'd had like 13 assassination attempts on his life. He got into a gunfight with aliens. And he'd been hit with an energy weapon. He talks about how people in the national parks are usually grabbed and used for alien research. So I mean, there's just so many things. Because here's the thing, fellas: if we found the bodies of everyone that had gone missing, that'd be one thing, but you don't, and that's what's scary.
Very true.
You just don't know. But again, I'm sure a large part of, not a large part, I'm sure there's a percentage that are cryptid related. And again, if you think about it, it makes sense. Let's just say you've got a deposed, elf Bigfoot that's getting old and he's injured or she's injured, and they see human being, that's an easy meal. And the same thing for, our dog person friend. It's the same thing. So, or maybe they just want to, be entertained, and they think, this person can be a playmate or something like that. And let's face it, human beings are not that tough. We're not very resilient.
We're pretty frail. Yeah, we're frail compared to other things.
Compared to these things, I mean, we're very frail. So if like a Bigfoot just grabbed you or something like that, there's a lot that can happen. There's a report that I have a friend of mine told me was real. It was about this researcher in Ohio, and he was placing recording devices around, and this Bigfoot came up behind him and like banged his head and kind of knocked him out and threw him over his shoulder, excuse me. And he was probably meaning to eat him. That's my guess was, but this guy had a Ruger Blackhawk and he pulled it and he just pointed and shot. I'm sure you guys know what story I'm talking about.
Yeah.
I just don't have permission to use names, so I don't. And and it just dropped the guy screaming and run away. But here's my thing: how many times does it happen to people that aren't armed and that don't wake up, and that just disappear forever? So and that story, the person told me, I hold him highest of regards, and he told me he believed that was 100% legitimate because he knew the guy personally, and he said he was never the same after that.
Yeah, imagine.
And he knew the witness that watched it too. So how many times? I mean, that's obviously not the first time that creature had done that. So, how many of those are out there that we don't know about?
Yeah, it reminds you of the Dennis Martin case in a way.
The Dennis Martin case, that happened not too far away from me. And that is the saddest thing in the world. Because you had these people report seeing a bear or bear-like creature with a little kid over his shoulder.
Yeah.
And then they've got then they end up with the Special Forces unit there. I mean, that's a crazy case.
It's a fascinating.
I mean, it's fascinating, but but if you look at it, it's insane because the Special Forces unit, they're using their own radio signals. They're doing all this. And how many times you ever see Special Forces unit come in to look for someone?
Right, and they did searches only at night too, which was very odd.
Exactly. There's another story not too far from there, where it was a small town. I'll tell you guys what I can use. I'll give you guys the names of it off air, but I'm not going to say it on air because I don't want anyone getting hurt. But because it's still an active zone, from what I understand. But there was about 7 or 8 Bigfoot, and they were very blatantly not concerned about being seen. They had just come to the point where apparently they just didn't care anymore. And they sent in a squad to go get them, and it was a 12-man squad, and only 7 came out.
Whoa.
And what was happening is they didn't realize is they were just as good in the trees as they were on the ground. And from what I heard from, again, this person I trust, what they were doing is they were just kind of dropping out of the trees and pulling people's heads off and disappearing.
Ooh, brutal.
Now they were all eventually they killed all 7. There might have been more, we don't know. They killed them all 7. They took them out in a Chinook helicopter in a net. But this happened very close to a small town. And you just, you never know what they're going to do. Because again, if they find an easy food source, why would they, predators don't like wasting calories looking for food.
Yeah, no, it's the nature of the beast to not expend energy like that.
Exactly. So, I mean, and let's be honest, as human beings, we're not adapted to deal with anything in the wild. We're not. We don't have any natural weapons. There's only so much karate's going to do against the Bigfoot. So,
right.
So if we're not armed with the proper implements we need to defend ourselves, then we're pretty much we're in trouble. And these creatures are they're born with weapons. I mean, Bigfoot's got brute strength, and Dogman's got jaws and claws.
Yeah, they are weapons in themselves.
Exactly. And and if you listen to some of the other podcasts or other stories, these jaws and claws can be used for the benefit of humanity or not. But until we find out, they are what they are.
Yeah, approach with caution.
Yeah, and realistically, I mean, I would be honest. I'm 100% sure in the fact that if I ran into another Dogman on a very different set of circumstances and it was upset, that's a big deal. That's a problem.
Oh yeah.
There's a very, very hefty chance you're not going to walk out of there. And I don't care what anyone says. I know if you run, you're going to attract that predator instinct. But the truth of the matter is, you don't have a whole lot of choices. That's why I always tell everyone, you have to be careful. You have to keep calm. You have to think, and it's not in those situations. That's tough because most people are just going to run. And that's the hard part is like, there's I have a whole, I self-proclaim myself as one of the premier Dogman researchers in this area. And the reason why I do that is because my research has been in Dogman in this area for, a long time. And I was talking about Dogman long before it was fashionable, after my, encounter. And again, it wasn't historically that long ago, but it was long enough to be before Dogman was real popular. Does that make sense?
Very much so.
And then I started getting all these reports. I started looking through other reports I'd taken and other reports friends of mine had taken. And then I came to the realization that, the Appalachian Trail is like 0.0 for Dogman. I think I'm a firm believer they use it as a migration trail. I think in the winter they come south, and in the summer they go north. And I think Sasquatch does the same thing. Just I think they migrate in different patterns. And I've got a whole theory about this, about their migration patterns. I think they do a cyclical migration around the continental United States, and they use the park systems to do it. But the reason why I say that is because I think, as far as I know, I was the one that was thinking about that and how they would migrate, because I would take reports, and then the next year I get the same reports. And after 3 years of this, I started coming up with the idea. I'm like, they've got to be migrating. And, as far as I know, I'd never heard anyone say that before. And I'm not saying I originated that, but I'm just talking about this general area. But, when there's a Dogman report, I usually get a phone call or an email or something like that. So that's why, I'm not being a self-proclaimed expert. I just call myself a premier researcher in that, just because of all the research I've done. And that's, and I'm blatant about that. I'm honest about it. I think I've probably done more research on the Eastern Seaboard where I am than anyone else has, just from the amount of time I've spent in the woods, just specifically doing Dogman stuff, or shall I say dog person, until we get a better name. So, it's just one of those things. But I think a lot of it just has to do with location.
Yeah, normally location and migration, especially whether it's parks or heavy wooded areas, they do play a factor into it. I've always thought about that in that road. Talking a little bit now, transition. I want to just go ahead and transition to a little bit about Sasquatch, because Dogman, I feel we could talk about so much for like literally, it could be one whole episode dedicated to it because there's a lot about it. But with Sasquatch, I want to say, like, for such a cryptid that's been out for so long and for one that has really made notoriety, do you think that Sasquatch along the lines are no different than your typical Dogman besides the different features? They're basically close to the same in structure and not in appearance, but majority of the same cases, same circumstances, right? Normally people see the creature, react to it, and then carry on.
Well, I think if you look at the historic record, I think, believe it or not, Bigfoot's probably more violent than Dogman. There's the Bigfoot wars that occurred on the West Coast, X amount of time ago, where the natives had just been tired of being, abused and treated as food source. And of course, there's Lovelock Cave where they were burned in, and then there's the conspiracy where the Smithsonian has grabbed all these massive skeletal structures all over the country and mounds and things like that. But they all kind of follow the same premises that, they were cannibalistic. The ones that were real cannibalistic had the red hair, and they fell into different types. So, if you go from the type 1s, the patty types, type 2s would be the chimpanzee types, type 3 would be, your beast of seven shoots types, your bamboo types, and the type 4 would be like your relic hominid type. They all kind of follow the same pattern when it comes to one thing, and that's these different types have a different temperament. And, when you're dealing with like the Myakka skunk ape, the Myakka skunk ape, it's got a more of a temper than, say, a patty type. So I think what happens is they kind of box all these Bigfoot or Sasquatch into one category, and they don't realize there's subcategories. Because realistically, if you're going to have a sighting, you want to run into a type 1 because they tend to be the less violent. And they'll be the ones that, all the stories you read about a Bigfoot helping like a kid lost in the woods and blah, 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 it's usually a type 1. Type 2s tend to be more violent. So the type 3s and the type 4s are incredibly violent, and that's like your Russian Yeren or the snowman, they call them down there. So I think what happens is they all get boxed into one category. And I think that there might have been, and you still see them or hear about them today, but the redheaded Sasquatch or the redheaded giants, as they were called, I think that might have been like a different offshoot. And I think we still have them today, but I think they've probably interbred with other ones. And that's why you get like these reports of like, instead of red, they were like a brownish red kind of thing. And I think those were like a very nefarious group, because most of the legends talk about how bad they were. So I think that's probably the category of Sasquatch that was doing the most damage as far as the cannibalistic acts and the violence towards the indigenous people. And I think that probably changed when the Western European came here with our bang sticks, because up till then, they didn't have to worry about that. So, it's one of those things where it's a kind of a question mark on what do you believe happened, the folklore or the reality, and I'm also a big believer that a lot of people think that when 1776 was going on, the only thing that was happening in the continental United States and North America and South America was the Revolutionary War. That's far from the truth. There was all kinds of stuff happening on the West Coast. The Russians were actually in the United States as far as Washington State, and doing trapping. Then you had the Spanish up, in the California area. But the smallpox epidemic had hit everyone. And if you know anything about smallpox is one of the few diseases, viruses that will jump from human to primate. So when a lot of people say, well, weren't there so many Bigfoot, or what happened to them? I think a huge population got wiped out from smallpox. And I think that that red-headed giant or the cannibalistic one probably took the biggest hit. And that's what, in my opinion, again, this is all just my opinion and my thought process, and you know, my own hypothesis on this. But I think that's what happened. I think they took this massive hit in their population, and I think xenocephali, or the dog man or the dog person, took the same hit. I think they were susceptible to the smallpox, and I think it wiped out a massive amount of them. And the ones that were left alive probably went high north until now, where their populations have gotten so much bigger simply because when you clear cut part of a forest, certain things happen. It's actually healthy for the ground because what happens when you clear cut, it's a renewable resource. You can always replant, but while you're replanting, grass tends to grow, and then you have animals that eat the grass like deer, and then you have this massive population influx in the deer population. Well, when you have a massive influx in population, and then there's usually a massive influx in the predatory population of what eats said creature. So if we can all agree that Bigfoot is omnivoric and it's not above eating deer, and it's actually probably one of their basic food staples, the more deer you have, it's a logical assumption to say then the population for the Bigfoot and the Sasquatch will get bigger because there's more food supply. Well, you can throw Dogman in there and say the same thing. So I think what's happened now is there's never been more deer in this country than there are at this point in time. And because of that and the time span they've had, these cryptids have had more time to reestablish their colonies. And that's why we have so many more sightings, and why we're getting all this new research on everything.
Yeah, there's always that type of thought process, especially too, and also with this various Sasquatch groups that have their own distinct origin, belief, and theory and thought that always gets thrown into the mix. So it really does make you do wonder about a lot of things, especially in folklore and origin, where these things do come from, because we don't really know for certainty. We only just go by what we go by the textbooks or what we see by people who post this stuff. Even in researchers' perspective, in the early 20th century, when technology was starting to kind of advance itself, even going into the mid 1900s, you had many cases where people would buy into a lot of the technology, and personally, when it comes to history and how they've gone about it, it often it threw people off basis because that was a different time period, but they had a personal understanding of it. But now it takes that understanding and twists it 10 times more in the 21st century, especially when you have many researchers going out and providing their own belief systems that contradict or where they think they come from. And it does lead to something controversial, too, at the end of the day, because while everyone's entitled to believe what they want to believe, it's tough because you don't have a necessary conclusion on Bigfoot or Dogman, especially Bigfoot.
No, you're right, because and then if you have your own opinion and someone more popular than you disagrees, then they're automatically gonna try to discredit you. And again, that's another sad event that happens in the cryptozoological world. But it's one of those things. You're absolutely right. We don't know, and that's why, again, I know I've said this before, Chris, but the truth of the matter is, there's no such thing as an expert. You can't call yourself an expert in this field or the paranormal field because there's just no way to prove what you're saying is 100% legit. And I think when everyone accepts, adopts, and applies that into their research, and maybe the egos will calm down a little bit, then I think maybe we can get some stuff done as a cohesive group. And the problem is that, and when you talk about doing, like, just say, I brought up being a cohesive group. The problem with that is someone always wants to be the grand poobah.
Mm-hmm.
And then you run into all these problems. So it's just a very, very, very sad state of affairs. Because I think if we could organize more as cryptozoological people, we could get more done. But you'd have to be willing to share all your evidence. And all these people saying that they've got definitive proof would have to show it, and they probably don't have it. So boom, they're discredited. And I think that's why that's probably one of the biggest issues we have is as a research group, a collectivity, if you will, of researchers, is that no one can really get along with anyone because honestly, the egos kick in. And it's really kind of silly if you think about it, because again, there's no such thing as an expert. Usually when you have a group of scientists argue about something, they've got scientific backgrounds and they've got scientific proof that they're trying to prove. When we get together, we're arguing about our own theories with absolutely no proof.
Oh, I agree with that. Ego destroys many things. I see it there and there in the communities, and we've dealt with that. I know I've dealt with that. I'm sure we've all had our arch nemesis that we've always seen ego come from, and that's just common because that's just kind of how we're built. We try to succeed. We try to showcase that we're better than one another, but forget our concept of survival and that we're all in it together. It's almost like the hustle. I mean, we saw it. Our grandparents saw it. Our parents saw it. We see it, and even now, our kids will see it. So it's all about how generations go about taught their ego, and in this case, how it applies to the field. How one can get away with so much. I've seen it multiple times. I've seen it recently. So
I'm with you. I get baffled on how a known hoaxer gets any press or PR, or they'll be the ones on TV. And I don't get it because it's like, I want to talk to the producers. Like, why is this guy on TV? Well, don't you know he's a known hoaxer? You obviously know this, but you're still rolling the ball with him. I mean, it makes no sense. Why don't you put someone legitimate up there that can be good for the science and help out? And it's like, I honestly think that when they do these TV shows, it's like a running joke to the producers. They really don't want to find anything.
And that kind of leads to a question, especially because Bigfoot's been very notable for appearing on a lot of these reality television shows where investigators go and actually try to go ahead and research, but we don't really get much out of it. Do you feel that reality television has kind of destroyed the concept of the belief system, especially with Bigfoot?
Well, the truth of the matter is yes and no. And here's why I say that. Has it destroyed credibility? Yes. But I think that's done intentionally. The other thing is it's also brought Bigfoot to a whole new generation.
Mm-hmm.
And they, hopefully in that generation, they'll be curious and there'll be researchers and investigators and cryptid detectives born out of that. Now, the reason why I say that I personally believe that the producers and the people that do these shows keep evidence hidden is because I was involved in a television show that the investigation we did could not have been any better. It was phenomenal. Fellas, I'm talking footprints, infrasound, being paced, all of this. I paced out of the woods on both sides, having things thrown, all kinds of stuff, all on film. All of it. None of it made the final cut. None of it. And to this day, I don't understand why not. Makes no sense to me. Because that right there wouldn't have been total proof, but it would have been such good TV as far as being like examples of this is the kind of research and this is the kind of evidence we got. But none of it made the final cut. And I don't understand. I don't understand why they did that. But again, I'm not in the glitterati that decides what's going to be seen, what's not. I'm just an ordinary average guy just researching. So, it's not for me to decide. But I honestly think they keep a lot of good evidence hidden for some reason. And maybe it's just because they don't believe what they got, or maybe they just don't think that people are ready to see it. I don't know, But I think eventually, one day, hopefully, that the truth is going to be shown. And and when that's done, then I'll go research something else. But I believe what we do at American Cryptid and Paranormal Societies is we want to help people, because what happens is when people see these things, they're trained from day one that they don't exist. If you see this, you're crazy. If you see this, there's something wrong with you. And then I'll talk to people that they're not too far from questioning their own reality. And then you have to sit there and say, no, these things are real. I know what you've heard, and I know what you were raised with, and I know what you've been taught by science. But believe me, these things are real. You're not going crazy. And that way you can have a conversation with someone. And I think when the truth does come out, a whole lot of people are going to feel better about themselves, because they might have had a situation happen years ago, and they've been telling themselves the whole time that never happened, that never happened, that never happened. And in all actuality, it did.
Yeah, often too, like I've gotten that, and I've also built my own opinion on it. Personally, I just think that with the credibility, it does definitely destroy it. But even too, with the actuality of providing it, there's good and bad. And if some people want to see the good to it and don't want to go and make up the whole stuff and for the gig of themselves, then yeah, it rolls both ways. But it also too falls in the lines of who will pay attention to it and who will make up their own interpretation, whether it's the audience or even the people who are on the show. So it rolls both ways, and that's why, like, I have to give you a lot of credit for what you do, because I really do enjoy a lot of what you provide. I like how you present yourself and how honest you are with it, because if really we had more researchers like that, and going back to the whole thing of when it comes to ego, I feel that we wouldn't have the issues we do in cryptozoology.
Well, Chris, everyone wants their 15 minutes. I mean, that'd be great. But the truth of the matter is, if you don't have anything to show, then you really don't deserve that 15 minutes. Is that, you see what I'm saying? So I think that's what separates, what I do and what the guys and the people I work with do, separates us from other people. Because there's a lot of people out there that they'll take a picture, they'll create some evidence, and then the next thing it's in the newspaper, and then it's on YouTube, and then it's on Facebook, and then they're getting hit after hit and hit. But in all actuality, when you get someone that knows what they're looking for and they're hearing the story, they're like, that's not even remotely true. Or the footprint doesn't have a mid-tarsal break in it, and it doesn't follow the 150 rule, and there's just no way. That's what I'm saying. So again, eventually, water meets its own level, and people get routed out. But those people do so much damage to the rest of us that are trying to do this legitimately, that it makes, when you tell people you look for Bigfoot, they usually laugh at you first. And then you're labeled, oh, this person's crazy, or this person's nuts, or, but okay, well, everyone's got their own opinion. But the truth of the matter is, when people do that, they're just causing more damage, and they're causing more people to think that there's something wrong with the rest of us, and that's not the case. So we've always kind of tried to be like just the opposite of that. We want to be 100% legit, 100% transparent. And here's what we find. We post everything we find. We don't hide anything. The truth of the matter is, we don't have anything to hide. I wish we did. We don't. And and that's why we post everything. This is what we found. This is what we find. It's up to the viewers. It's up to the common person who's looking at our website to make up their own mind. And that's how we do things. And I think that's why we have the credibility we do.
I have to agree. It would make perfect sense, and that's the best way of presentation. Just a couple more questions on Sasquatch, though. When it comes to vocalizations, mimicking, and tree knocking, it's weird, because people often, I think, get it as in the fashion that it's a form of communication, but I always kind of see it as their warning. What do you think about all of that?
Well, I think Sasquatch communicates with each other. I think the wood knocks, I have several opinions on the wood knocks, and again, can't prove either one of them. But I think the wood knocks actually, I think that helps them to hunt. And here's why I say that. I think when, like, just say a herd of deer hear the wood knock, they might run, but they might be being herded into a specific area, because they're going to avoid this noise by going this way, and there could be a group or tribe of Bigfoot waiting for them this way. And I think that's why they do that. But I also think it could be a communication system too, like, hey, get ready, here comes lunch, that kind of thing. As far as the vocalizations go, I'm sure that is probably to communicate with each other. To me, it makes sense. Uh, to me, a Bigfoot cry, like a real good Bigfoot howl, kind of sounds to me like a whale, just in a different tone. It's got that. It goes up and it goes low, and it's just, to me, and I don't think that can be created by anyone else. And I think that's probably part of their speech pattern. But I think the people that go out there, like, again, I'm not mentioning names, and I don't want to sound critical of another organization, but I also don't think going out in the woods and pretending you can make those same noises is going to get any response, because, that's, they know what they're dealing with. they can hear their own. You know, you just can't match the power in their lungs.
No, you cannot. And I don't only recommend people to go and do that because personally, I mean, trying to figure out why would anyone want to go and do something like that in its own nature, to me would be pretty asinine, especially considering the circumstance, as you even mentioned. I mean, these creatures are capable of doing stuff, and it almost as if it's like invading their own type of persona where it's like you're mimicking me, and that's a bad sign, and it really does set them off. And like we talk about personality, and we talk about how the word, even with dogmen, it's common. But one other thing too is that in a specific way, do you feel that there could be some sort of drawn conclusion on specific cryptids like this, Bigfoot, dogmen, name it, anytime soon, or do you personally feel that this is something that we're still trying to figure out answers for, and information like this won't come out? Personally, we won't get to a solid conclusion for a number of years.
Well, you know, that's a really good question. And the truth of the matter is I can't lie to you. I don't know. I honestly don't. I would love, Chris, it would make me so happy to sit there, okay, December 14th, 2020, they're going to release everything. But there's reasons why they don't do it. And I actually understand, you know, there's an old expression, you know, I understand the point of the fox, and I also understand the point of the hound. All right. Because if you release all this information, again, you change the world. You change the way everything's looked at. You change religion. I mean, you change the way the economy is going to run. Because if you think for 1 minute they're not going to be declared a protected species, look what they did with the great horned owl. You know, I mean, you know, look at the things that have happened in the Pacific Northwest to protect the bird. You know, they stopped logging. They cost thousands and thousands of jobs. What do you think would happen to the lumber industry and the forestry industry? And let me ask you this: do you think the national parks would make the money they're making if they find out, oh, by the way, there's a possibility, small though it might be, but there is that possibility that, you know, a hungry cryptid might grab you or someone in your family, and you know that's that. So I just don't think, I honestly don't think the world's ready for it. I think it's probably the same reason why the governments don't come out and tell everyone that aliens and UFOs are real, because they couldn't handle it. You know, in small numbers, people can handle things. You cluster us all, you put us all together and cluster humanity together, and you drop a bomb like that on them, that no one's going to understand it. They're going to freak out, and then just be chaos, because you've just completely changed everyone's reality. And to do that, you know, again, you create chaos. So I just don't see that happening. I think there's a select few that know exactly what happens, you know, and you know, people can call them whatever they want, you know, the Illuminati, the powers that be, you know, the top, you know, 1%, you know, rich people, whatever. But I think there's a lot of people that know exactly what's going on, but they're never going to say anything. So I just don't think the average person is ready for that kind of knowledge. And I hate saying that, but I do kind of agree with it, because, you know, Chris, the truth is, if I could prove definitively that Bigfoot exists, if I had definitive proof without having to hurt anything, without having to hurt or kill or shoot anything, I probably would not release it. It would be enough for me to know that I was right in my belief system, but I would not want to compromise the safety of these creatures, because you and I both know there's going to be a bunch of people out there, and they're going to make room on their trophy wall for, you know, the boss of the woods, or the dog person. You know what I'm saying? So it's you have to think about both ends of the spectrum here. You know, you have to think about the cryptids we're protecting versus the knowledge that we're keeping from people. So I mean, I understand, I get it, and I hate saying it, but I agree with part of it. You know, and that, I know that sounds hypocritical, because I'm a researcher, I'm an investigator. You know, I call myself a cryptid detective, but I haven't had that ability or that opportunity where I could give definitive proof. So the truth of the matter is, you know, I know deep in my heart what I would do, but I don't know how I would make that work. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does, and I agree with that. I think anybody at this stage, it's still pretty early to say, and you really hit the nail on the head. I have to agree with it all. Ryan, though, do you have any additional questions that you'd like to throw out there?
No questions, but I want to say that I agree with Christian on this. I would never reveal any information. If I had something that could break the case, it would be the end of the mystique for me. And, that'd be a sad day for me. It'd be bittersweet. And I just wouldn't trust people enough, because they want to kill them, as Christian said. And to me, that would just be unfair and just cruel. It's not something I'd ever want to have a hand in.
No, you're right, because it would be 100%. I would take full responsibility for it. I would feel guilty, even whether or not, I didn't pull the trigger. I allowed it to happen. I gave the green light, regardless of where it happened.
Yeah, you let people know they were there. Therefore, you're partially to blame.
Yeah, and I just, that's just not right. That's why, everyone says, "Oh, we need a body on the table."
No, we don't.
And the truth of the matter is, and I know we're pressed for time, fellas, and I apologize, but this is something I'm a firm believer in. So if you just bear with me on this one, if anyone ever did terminate a Bigfoot or Dogman, all right, whether by gunshot, they hit it with a car, something, the chances of that body ever becoming public knowledge are zero. It will not happen. You will not make $1 million. You will not have your face on National Geographic. What will happen is this: you will be visited remarkably fast by an agency that will collect everything you have found, will collect the body, and then you will be told things like, if you ever talk about this again, we will put you in prison for the rest of your life. The IRS will cause a problem for you. It goes on and on and on. We've heard all these stories before. I am a firm believer all of that is exactly what would happen. So it does not behoove anyone to go out there and shoot these creatures. It would basically be cold-blooded murder, because all you're doing is you're killing something for the sake of killing it, because it'll never see the light of day. And all you've done basically is kill an innocent creature that may or may not have part of the same DNA we have. And let's just say, take it up a level. Let's just say that one creature is providing for a family of 2 or 3. So now you've doomed that whole family unit. And who the hell are you to do that? And I'm sorry, I don't mean to be so abrasive with that, but that's just how I feel.
No, I mean, I would be the same way. Despite how I might feel about these creatures, I'd always feel that there'd be some form of defense to protect, because these creatures, they don't bother you, they don't want to mess with you. You provoke them, that's just that's how the situation plays, but that it's no different than humans. Humans want to be left alone with their family, and that's how it is. I mean, I'd be the same way with mine, and that's just how that thing goes, because that's part of our nature. Same thing with the Bigfoots. So I agree. I really do. And you know what? You're entitled to that belief. I agree with it, because I feel the same way.
There have been so many reports, even on both of these specific cryptids, of moving in family units. It is hard for me to believe that they don't. So, and if you hurt one, then you're hurting the whole family unit. So when I see these people on TV, hey, we're going to go get us a Bigfoot, we're going to kill him, put him on his lap. That, to me, that's nothing but murder. That's just cold-blooded murder. That's all that is. And again, you're talking to a guy who walks into the woods with, I'm armed, and I would defend myself. I would shoot up in the air to probably scare something before I would actually aim it at anything. But, I'm a firm believer in being able to protect yourself. So I know that sounds a little hypocritical, but I would never intentionally go out and kill anything to prove it for science when I know it would never be proven. Because even if you did, even if you could get the body out, you're going to be completely discredited no matter what you do anyway. So it's a Kobayashi Maru. It's a no-win scenario. So just don't do it. Take it off the plate. Just think of another way. Video evidence. There's nothing, get the best video evidence you can. Trail cams, cameras, thermal, infrared, whatever you got, use it. That's how you're going to prove this stuff. And then people can make up their own minds. And eventually, if the evidence and the photos are good enough, the truth will have to come out.
I agree. Well, hey, Christian, I am going to say this. Please feel free to stay on the line. Basically, the last question I'm going to throw you is basically you're going to be promoting your channel, your work, and everything else. All right, bud?
Well, thank you, man. I appreciate it.
You're very welcome. Well, hey, Christian, I want to just say this before we conclude the show. I want to thank you again for coming on the show. It's a pleasure to hear you. I love your beliefs. I love your enthusiasm and how you go about this stuff. And you're a fantastic guy. I'd love to have you come back on. But before we do conclude, I just want to ask you, can you tell us a little bit about your society, your organization, Sure. What you do?
Like I said, we actually have 3 websites in one. So if you were to Google American Cryptid Paranormal Society.com, or if you Googled Asheville Cryptid Paranormal Society.com or cryptidguy.com, it's all going to go to the same webpage. And what we do is we put all our evidence up there, and you go through it, you look at it, and you make your own decision as to what it is. Our contact information is there. We have several phone numbers. You can reach us at 828-407-0046 or 828-782-3766. And if you have a cryptid issue or a paranormal issue, we're more than happy to help you out. Again, we don't charge anything. We don't want to take anyone's money. That's not our mission. We want to help people. We want to help people with cryptid and paranormal issues, and maybe give them some understanding, and maybe help them get rid of any problems they may ensue. So again, the best way to get in touch with us is just through the website, and all our contact information is right there. And you'll also be able to view our podcast. We have a podcast. Me and one of my collaborators is a man named Daniel Tiny Hurst, and it's called Beyond Fringe, and it's located at the American Cryptid and Paranormal Society YouTube channel, and that's also the Asheville Cryptid and Paranormal Society YouTube channel. So either one of those will bring you right there, and our format's right on YouTube, and you can enjoy the podcast. We'd love to have you subscribe and listen. All our contact information for Twitter and Instagram and Facebook is also on the website page. And if you'd subscribe and listen, I'd really be appreciative. And I want to thank you guys so much for having me. Chris, Ryan, this has been a blast, and I appreciate you guys so much. And please continue the good work you do, because there's not a whole lot of people out there that can hold their head up high with pride and dignity and say they did the right thing for the cryptozoological world today. And you guys can do that every time you put a show on. And I am very proud to be part of that. And thank you so very much.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah, no, seriously, thank you, Christian. I really do appreciate those words. You and I both, we both have in our organizations our beliefs, and it's great to have communication with such other talents out there who deserve it and can build a communication barrier with. I know that when Ryan and we really started to go out and peer as this co-host duo, that we wanted to showcase that we mean well and that we are on the same beliefs and understand the measures, and to sit down and speak with other researchers out there who are in the same junction and get it. That's why I wanted you on the show. I love your personality. I love how you go about things and your beliefs. And that's something to look forward to, and kudos for the future. And I want to thank you again, because you're very good, and I can't say much enough. I mean, I can go on forever about it, man. You have a very good passion and professionalism, and keep it up.
Well, thank you so very much. And again, anytime you guys need me, I'm a phone call away. Just remember that.
Absolutely. If you guys enjoyed this episode of the Venomous Fringe, please feel free to leave a like and also subscribe to the channel if you are new. If you guys would like to get in contact with us, you can send us an email at thevenomousfringe@gmail.com. I'll leave a link to it also down below in the description. If you guys are interested on social media and are looking for a Venomous Fringe group, you guys can check out our official Venomous Fringe group. All you gotta do is check out the link down below to it. And if you guys are also interested to give us a like on Facebook, our official Facebook page, feel free to. I'll leave 2 links down below for you guys to take a look at. And if you guys would like to follow me and Ryan on social media, you can follow us at our Facebooks and our Twitters and Instagrams down below as well. I want to thank you all again for tuning in to this edition of the Venomous Fringe, and you all have a fantastic evening.